Did you know that there was a prehistoric war so deadly that it wiped out 95% of men? And even more shocking, no one really knows about it. This is the story of what may have been the greatest genocide in human history. For over 2 million years, our ancestors lived on this planet without really running into any other intelligent species. But around 70,000 years ago, something changed. New groups of modern humans began migrating out of Africa and into Europe and Asia. And they weren't alone. Wherever they went, they encountered another hominin species, the Neanderthals, and sometimes another group known as the Denisovans. These three species of archaic humans would interbreed with each other and leave behind genetic markers in the DNA of people today. But we don't really know much about them as people because their bones are pretty rare in the fossil record. The most famous Neanderthal skeleton, for instance, was found in a German cave in 1856 and was named after the place where it was discovered. So it's called the Neanderthal. But that's not our story today. We won't be talking about Neanderthals or Denisovans. We'll be talking about a mysterious group of extinct humans whose story is only beginning to unfold. The first thing we need to talk about is the Y chromosome. This is one of the 23 pairs of chromosomes in your body, but it's special because it only comes in one copy. Everyone has 2 sex chromosomes, but if you're biologically male, one of yours will be an X chromosome and the other will be a Y chromosome. If you're biologically female, you'll have 2 X chromosomes. The reason why this is important is because scientists can use the Y chromosome to track paternal lineages through time. By comparing the DNA sequences of the Y chromosomes from different people, we can estimate how long ago they shared a common ancestor, and by doing this we can reconstruct the genealogical relationships between different groups of men. In 2003, researchers did this to track the ancestry of men from around the world. They discovered that all of the Y chromosomes they looked at could be traced back to one man who lived somewhere in Africa around 60,000 years ago. He's now called the Y chromosomal Adam. Since then, scientists have collected more data and pushed that date back to around 200,000 years ago, but the point remains the same. At some point in the past, there was a massive genetic bottleneck for men. The number of men alive at any given time was drastically lower than the number of women, and it looks like this happened at least twice in our history. In the first case, the effective population size of men dropped from around 10,000 down to just 600. Then in the second event, it dropped from around 1,000 down to just 80. So what caused these collapses? No one knows for sure, but there are some theories. Maybe there were a bunch of natural disasters or some sort of plague that wiped out most of the men. Whatever the cause, though, we can see the effects in the DNA of the men alive today. If you are watching this video, it means that you survived both of these events. That makes you part of the 8%. In fact, if you have a Y chromosome, you're descended from one of the 80 men who survived the second collapse. But there's something weird going on. Around 200 miles away from here in the southwestern United States, there are also fossils of an extinct hominin species whose story is only beginning to unfold. Their brain size averaged around 1,000 cubic centimeters, which is around 300 less than modern humans. But unlike the Neanderthals, very little is known about them. In 1927, archaeologist J.S. Udden found some bones in a cave in Mexico. He identified the bones as belonging to a small-brained hominin, and he named it after the place where it was discovered. So it's called the Xochipilli hominin. But since then, there have only been a handful of other discoveries. There's a few teeth, a jawbone, and a skull. None of these specimens were found in the same place as the original Xochipilli bones, but scientists have determined that they are definitely related. Until recently, the oldest of these fossils was thought to be around 11,500 years old. But a new analysis suggests that it might be closer to 135,000 years old. Either way, it's clear that these people lived in North and South America for tens of thousands of years. So who were they? Were they the first Americans? Well, maybe. But this is where things get weird. Between 2014 and 2016, archaeologists excavated a site in Mexico called the Cactus Hill. They found stone tools, animal bones, and traces of plant domestication. But most importantly, they found human remains. The bones belonged to 3 adults and 4 children, and they ranged in age from infants to elderly. But before the excavation was over, the team found more bones nearby, and as they carefully brushed away the dirt, they uncovered the most complete skeleton of a hominin that had ever been found in the Americas. The team named the individual Man 1. He was about 5 feet tall and 100 pounds. He had a sloping forehead, a low, long skull, and a receding chin. When the team analyzed his DNA, they found that he wasn't a Neanderthal, a Denisovan, or a modern human. He was something else. As they looked over the rest of the bones at the site, they realized that this was true for everybody. The people of Cactus Hill didn't belong to any of the 3 groups that scientists expected to find. Scientists think that these people might have been the descendants of the Xochipelli hominins, but they aren't sure. And that's because, while they were excavating the site, they also found something unexpected. The Cactus Hill people lived in an area that was inhabited by modern humans 13,000 years ago, and when the team analyzed their bones, they found that they had Neanderthal DNA. They also found evidence that they had interbred with the Xochipelli hominin. But that doesn't make sense, because if they came to the Americas after the Xochipelli people, then how could they have descended from them? So who were these people? And how do they fit into the history of the Americas? Well, one team of scientists thinks they might be the answer to a mystery that's been keeping me up at night. You see, when we look at the Y chromosomes of modern Native Americans, we can trace them all back to one man who lived in Siberia around 20,000 years ago. Scientists think that he was the founding father of all Native Americans, but that presents a bit of a problem. How did he and all the other men get to the Americas? You see, at that time, the only land connection between Asia and North America was a narrow strip of land called the Bering Land Bridge. Today, the bridge is underwater, but during the last ice age, it was dry. And scientists think that this was the route that early people used to migrate into the Americas. But the problem is that we haven't found any archaeological evidence of people on the bridge itself. We haven't found any signs of human activity on the Siberian side either. It's almost as if the first Americans just appeared in North America fully formed. But the Cactus Hill people may have changed everything. They could represent the missing link between the Asian ancestors of Native Americans and the Native Americans of today. And they may help us understand the prehistoric war that nearly wiped out all men. Maybe the first Americans weren't the descendants of the Xochipelli hominin. Maybe they were the Xochipelli hominin. See, between 14,000 and 12,000 years ago, rising sea levels and melting glaciers caused a rapid climate shift. This may have triggered a mass extinction of plants and animals, and it led to a collapse of cultures across the globe. But it may have also been the catalyst for the prehistoric war that drove most men to extinction. When the glaciers melted, the Bering Land Bridge disappeared. And as the climate warmed, the Xochipelli hominin would have faced stiff competition for resources. They were wiped out by the end of the Pleistocene epoch, and the few surviving men passed on their Y chromosomes to the next generation. Each of the men who survived the prehistoric war was a descendant of one of those men. We literally wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this catastrophe. So what caused this war? We don't know. But this is where the story gets really interesting, because the timing of this war corresponds to the emergence of several ancient myths from around the world. In the stories of Gilgamesh, the Great Flood takes out 2/3 of humanity. In the biblical story of Noah, it takes out all but 8 people. And in the story of Deucalion and Pyrrhus, it takes out all but the couple who escaped on a boat. Some scholars say that these myths are just that, myths, but others say that they preserve the memories of a real event, a war that took out 95% of men and gave birth to our species. The human race has existed on Earth for over 200,000 years. In that time, there have been many great civilizations that have risen and fallen, from the ancient Egyptians to the Roman Empire. But what many people do not realize is that our history is also littered with times of great destruction and death. In fact, at one point in history, an estimated 95% of men were wiped out in just a few short years. This event, known as the Younger Dryas Impact Event or the Black Death, was one of the most devastating in human history. It had a profound impact on the course of human civilization, and it's something that we can learn from today. It all started around 13,000 years ago, when the Earth began to warm up after the last ice age. This period of time is known as the Younger Dryas, and it marked a significant shift in the Earth's climate. As the temperatures rose, the ice caps melted and sea levels began to rise. This, in turn, caused major disruptions in the global ecosystem, leading to widespread extinctions of both animals and plants. However, humans were able to adapt to these changes, and they began to spread out across the globe. Unfortunately, this expansion came at a cost. As humans moved into new territories, they came into conflict with one another. And as we all know, war is one of the most devastating events that can occur. And now we have to go back to the beginning of this horrifying war. One of the oldest known civilizations was that of the Natufians. The Natufians lived in what is now Israel, and they are believed to have been the first people to settle in one place permanently. They lived in small villages, and they farmed crops and raised livestock. The Natufians were able to thrive in this region because of the Fertile Crescent, which is an area of land that is considered to be the birthplace of agriculture. The Fertile Crescent provided the Natufians with the resources they needed to survive, and they were able to build a prosperous civilization. However, the Nithians would not have it easy. Soon they would be attacked by another group of people who would become their greatest rivals, the Kibbutz. The Kibbutz were a nomadic tribe of people who lived in what is now Jordan. They were hunters and gatherers, and they traveled from place to place following the herds of animals that they hunted. The Kibbutz were constantly on the move, and they didn't settle in one place for very long. This way of life made them very different from the Natufians, and it would eventually lead to conflict between the two groups. As the Natufians farmed the land and raised livestock, the Kibbutz began to encroach on their territory. The Kibbutz were attracted to the Natufian villages because they offered an easy source of food. The Kibbutz were able to steal the Natufians' crops and livestock, and they were able to live off the land without having to farm it themselves. This caused tension between the two groups, and eventually it led to violence. The Natufians were able to defend their villages against the Kibbutz attacks for some time, but eventually the Kibbutz were victorious. The Kibbutz were able to use their knowledge of the land to their advantage. They knew how to hide in the desert, and they were able to ambush the Natufians when they were least expecting it. Additionally, the Kibbutz were more aggressive than the Natufians, and they were willing to do whatever it took to win the war. As the war dragged on, the Natufians began to lose hope. They had never experienced such a brutal and relentless enemy, and they were starting to feel like they were losing the war. However, they refused to give up. The Natufians were a proud people, and they were determined to defend their way of life. In the end, the Kibbutz were victorious, and the Natufians were wiped out. The Kibbutz were able to conquer the Natufian villages, and they were able to take control of the Fertile Crescent. This victory allowed the Kibbutz to become the dominant power in the region, and it set them up for success in the future. Unfortunately, the Kibbutz would not enjoy their victory for long. The war with the Natufians had taken a toll on them, and they were weakened as a result. This made them vulnerable to attack from other groups of people, and it would eventually lead to their downfall. So what happened to the Kibbutz after they defeated the Natufians? To find out, let's fast forward a few thousand years to the year 8200 BCE. By this time, the Natufians had long been gone, and the Kibbutz were the dominant force in the region. However, as we mentioned earlier, the Kibbutz were not invincible, and they would soon face a new enemy, the Khiam civilization. The Khiam civilization was located in what is now Syria, and they were a powerful and prosperous people. The Khiam were skilled farmers, and they had a strong military. They were able to expand their territory rapidly, and they soon came into conflict with the Kibbutz. The Khiam were determined to expand their empire, and they saw the Kibbutz as an obstacle in their way. The Kibbutz, on the other hand, were determined to defend their way of life, and they refused to give up without a fight. This led to the war between the two civilizations, and it was a brutal and bloody affair. The Khazars were a disciplined and well-trained army, and they were able to inflict heavy casualties on the Kibbutz. Despite their best efforts, the Kibbutz were eventually defeated and their civilization was wiped out. But wait, there's more. The Khiam were not satisfied with just defeating the Kibbutz. They wanted to completely eradicate them from existence. And so, they began a systematic campaign of genocide against the Kibbutz people. The Chimams slaughtered entire families of Kibbutz, and they showed no mercy. They burned villages, destroyed crops, and left a trail of death and destruction in their wake. In the end, almost the entire kibbutz race was wiped out. Only a small group of survivors managed to escape and flee to other parts of the world. The Kiam civilization, on the other hand, continued to thrive. They ruled over the Fertile Crescent for many years, and they became one of the most powerful civilizations of their time. However, like all civilizations, the Kiam would eventually fall. Their empire would eventually collapse, and their way of life would eventually be forgotten. But the question remains, where did all the men go? What happened to the men of the Natufian, Kibbutz, and Chima civilizations? One theory to explain the disappearance of the men is the classic example of male infanticide. Male infanticide is a form of gender-based violence in which baby boys are killed intentionally. This practice is often carried out during wartime, and it's a way of reducing the enemy's fighting force. It's possible that the Chimams carried out mass male infanticide against the kibbutz, and that this is why there are so few male remains from this time period. Another theory is that the men were all killed in battle. It's possible that the Chimams were able to wipe out the vast majority of male kibbutz fighters in battle, and that this is why there are so few male remains from this time period. A third and final theory is that the men were victims of a disease epidemic. It's possible that a disease outbreak specifically targeted men, and this is why there are so few male remains from this time period. We may never know for sure what happened to all the men. However, we can be certain that the female survivors of these civilizations played a crucial role in their survival. These women were able to adapt to the changing times, and they were able to build new lives for themselves and their children. They passed down the knowledge and skills to future generations, and this ensured that the culture and traditions of these civilizations would live on. But there's still a lot we don't know about this mysterious event. Many researchers believe that there is evidence that this mass extinction of men happened all around the world at the same time. If this is true, then it's possible that this event had a profound impact on the course of human history. But what exactly caused this mass extinction of men? We may never know for sure, but there are many theories. Some researchers believe that a comet or asteroid impact could have caused the Younger Dryas impact event. This is based on the fact that there is evidence of a massive increase in the number of meteorites that hit the Earth during this time period. Others believe that the Black Death was caused by a volcanic eruption. This is based on the fact that there is evidence of a major volcanic eruption in the geological record from around the same time period. Still others believe that the Younger Dryas impact event and the Black Death were caused by human activity. This is based on the fact that there is evidence that humans were living in close proximity to each other during this time period and that they were competing for resources. No matter what caused the Younger Dryas impact event and the Black Death, one thing is for sure, it was a devastating event that had a profound impact on the course of human history. It's possible that this event led to the development of agriculture and the rise of civilization, or it could have caused the extinction of many human species. We may never know for sure, but one thing is for certain, this event was one of the most significant in human history. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button for more content. Also, make sure to check out our other videos as well. Thanks for watching.